author, columnist, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, talk show host, and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio. We have an incredible lineup on the show today covering the new Fed chair nomination, Trump accounts, the housing loneliness, and the upcoming SAVE Act. It's going to be quite the show. Remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to be joined by Liberty Nation's Economics Affairs Editor, Mr. Andrew Moran, back in the studio. Thanks for being here, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So the big news on the economics front is the name being put forward to be the chair of the Federal Reserve, Mr. Kevin Warsh, or as you wrote in your fascinating article on the page of LibertyNation.com, The Art of Warsh. And I thought that was both clever and entertaining. So congratulations there, Andrew. I hope you're as clever and entertaining on this segment as you were in the article. So now we'll find out. We've before camera we were discussing Woody Allen books and Schopenhauer and the misery and the mundanity of life that certain people hold. So let's jettison that element and let's look forward to what is Mr. Warsh going to bring to the Federal Reserve, assuming he gets through nomination.
Well, you can see how the market reacted to when Trump made the announcement of Kevin Warsh. I mean, U.S. stocks sold off, precious metals sold off, treasury yields were, a little changed. So overall, I mean, he brings a hard money hawk stance to the Federal Reserve as he did when he was
That's all good for the dollar, right? That's all good for the dollar.
Absolutely. You look at the U.S. dollar, that thing rallied 1% when Trump made his announcement. And U.S. dollars, if everyone has been following it, it's been on a downward decline for like 10% over the past year. So, he's good for the U.S. dollar. But that's contradictory to what the White House wants to accomplish, because if it wants to accomplish greater exports, it needs a weaker U.S. dollar. So Trump was asked recently, what do you think about the U.S. dollar? He said, I love what's happening to the U.S. dollar. It's fantastic. But, if Warsh follows through on his reform agenda, that would be bullish for the U.S. dollar, but not necessarily for Trumponomics.
So I think that the general perception of what the Fed does is it controls interest rates, and that's about it. But it controls that based on its dual mandate, right? So first, what is I guess we all know what Warsh's opinion on the interest rate is, right?
Interest rate should be lower, but he has a different idea of how to get to that path. I mean, one thing he really wants to focus on, based on his overall comments, whether his interview with Hoover Institution or his appearance at the Reagan Foundation or at the Brookings Institution, his argument is that less control of the balance sheet, less expansive notion of the balance sheet, letting it shrink, and then overall over long term, and that would bring interest rates lower. But whether he's going to take that fast and furious approach, as some had thought would happen, like with Kevin Hassett, that remains to be seen. But he's really going to take, based on what he says. I mean, who knows if he's actually accomplished it? The federal governors, they take incremental reforms. I mean, based on what he's talked about, he wants to take a chainsaw the whole thing and completely transform it. But it would be amazing to see how less. Summarize what he said. He says a little less running of the printing press, a little smaller balance sheet, and you can restore greatness to the Federal Reserve.
I mean, it doesn't seem unreasonable, right? A little less printing press go brrr, and a slightly smaller balance sheet. It doesn't necessarily sound like that's economic chaos ahead, does it?
Well, to the U.S. stock market, I mean, that's the death knell of it, because the idea with the stock market is that the Federal Reserve is going to intervene no matter what. How it's always it's always in a crisis mode, and that for example, one thing that he wants to change is forward guidance, and forward guidance is a relatively new phenomenon that occurred in the Federal Reserve in its 100 plus year history. And starting in the early 2000s, the Federal Reserve incrementally brought in forward guidance, meaning So, for example, in 2004, Alan Greenspan said, we're going to have likely higher interest rates over the coming years. And that was the first test of forward guidance. Then Ben Bernanke during the global financial crisis, he said it's the likelihood because of current economic conditions we're going to have lower interest rates for an extended period of time, and that's been the go-to for the Federal Reserve. Now it's been curtailed a little bit. Jerome Powell, he would say, "Oh, we're going by data dependence, or we're going meeting by meeting," but there's still that forward guidance element to it. And so, what Warsh wants to do by limiting forward guidance, he says that the Federal Reserve shouldn't be front and center. The investors should not be on the edge of their seats based on every single meeting of the Federal Reserve. You read Liberty Nation News, for example, and there's always this thing whereby, what the Fed says to this jobs report is what really matters. So if it's a bad jobs report, the Federal Reserve is going to start cutting interest rates, and that's bullish for the stock market. He wants to take a different approach. He wants to go back to what it seems like the 1990s, where the Federal Reserve is not as communicative as it was during the Ben Bernanke, Janet Yellen, and Jerome Powell era.
Okay, so I don't know. I guess from an international perspective, the idea that there'll be no forward planning, which means that no forward prognostication, I guess, about market conditions, and if they're just this is where we're at now, therefore this is what we should do. It seems like everything across on an international stage would kind of fall into line there, because there's not a whim driving it. So it gives I think this is the right way to look at it. It removes the unpredictability factors where you can just look at, and of course things trail. We know that they trail. It's not exactly, this is what happens on day one. But there's a certain predictability. So you can look at, you take the last 2 quarters reports, and you can look at that and say, well, based on those last 2 quarters reports, I pretty much know what the Federal Reserve's going to do, or what their position is going to be come the next FOMC, right?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I mean, that's what the whole point of the forward guidance is that you're supposed to remove that unpredictability and create, a lasting impression for the financial market. So it's not a guessing game. Sure. And what's saying Christopher Waller, he's a Fed governor, and he was a contender for the Fed chair position. And his argument is that the Federal Reserve doesn't have a crystal ball. It doesn't have great forecasting. It can make you look out 6-8 months into the future, but can look at what's going to happen in 2027, 2028? Probably not. And then also, excuse me, to your point, Kevin Warsh would say, it's a swivel chair problem whereby, if a Fed governor says interest rates are going to be 2.5% in the year 2026, and we're going to, lower the balance sheet, then the problem with that is that they're going to stick to their words. They're going to stick to their prognostications rather than based on economic fundamentals. So that's the whole point of what Warsh has said to curtail near-term forecasting, to either revise or abolish forward guidance. But then the other hand, critics will say, well, then what do you have to hide? I mean, do you really need to be the man behind the curtain? Can't you not just speak to the Federal Reserve as it does now during press conferences and its post-meeting FOMC statement and minutes? Why do you have to hide behind that? But I can understand Warsh's point, how if everything goes by it's so sacred what the Fed says, then you're not going to have a market based on fundamentals. You're going to have a financial market just based on what the Fed does and the most powerful tool in its arsenal, which is interest rate policy.
Yeah,
or I guess you could say QE, but that's intertwined.
Sure. It's I don't know. It's quite a complex situation, isn't it, that you have currently, because we can say that Jerome Powell, Jay Powell's not going to cut by a quarter point, or he's not going to cut by a quarter point, but it's all the associated ephemera that goes around that is creating a lot of market volatility, and you already have that with the president. What you don't need is that from the Federal Reserve as well. They shouldn't be operating in a similar manner, whereas one statement from another can upset things. It should be that one acts as a linchpin and one is off doing the wildness. And I think if the current Fed's behavior is better suited to a more staid and steady president than Donald Trump. But with Donald Trump as the president, you need something a bit more staid and steady with the Federal Reserve. Or have I got that whole thing wrong?
Well, to your point, one thing that I admired from Kevin Warsh is how he sounded like a Milton Friedman type individual, where he was blaming the Federal Reserve for the fiscal deterioration going on in Washington. And that's the first time I've heard either a Fed contender or a Federal Reserve leader make that admission that it's the Federal Reserve subsidizing all this reckless spending in Washington. Also to your point, there was an interview, I think, with CNBC last year, when he said that the Federal Reserve should have a policy alliance with the Treasury Department, whereby and so, for example, in 1951, it created a famous alliance whereby after the Second World War, the Federal Reserve would be independent and it would be responsible and it would know what the Treasury is doing. Before that, the administration, the Treasury, it would force the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates drastically, to run the printing press, to afford the guns and butter of the Second World War and all the spending that occurred. So this whole one thing leading up to his announcement, the fear was that he's not going to operate it. He's going to eradicate. There's a fear that the Powell successor is going to eradicate Federal Reserve independence, and it's not going to be monetary policy sovereignty. It's going to be dictated by the White House. But based on the market's reaction, you can see that, okay, that's not going to happen. It's going to be an independent Federal Reserve, but not so much whereby everyone is just so worried day by day how it's going to be the last instrument of lending, and it's going to be the last instrument of controlling economic conditions, and that it's just going to be someone who, in his interview with Hoover Institution, he cited Milton Friedman's idea whereby you have the Federal Reserve comes out once a year and it says we're going to raise the printing press by 2%. We're going to grow the money supply by 2% to account for economic growth and population, and that is it. And in a way, I mean, what the goal should be eradicating the Federal Reserve, but the next best thing is probably what Warsh has proposed doing, which is shrinking its power and not making an omnipotent institution.
So we're saying there's a Puxicatawny Phil of the groundhog variety coming to the Federal Reserve, and that might be springtime coming around the corner. Andrew Moran, we'll be back with you after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Andrew back on Liberty Nation Radio, continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation Economics Affairs Editor, Mr. Andrew Moran. Thanks for sticking around, Andrew. Now, another piece that you delved deep into on LibertyNation.com was about the Trump accounts. And this is really... Now, I try and follow most facets of news from politics, legislation, economics, health, insurance markets, things, just so I've got a good overview, and that benefits me in my particular role. But I've noticed that so few people are discussing the Trump accounts. It's almost like nobody can come up. I mean, specifically, I'm talking about the media on the left. So few places can come up with reasonable criticisms of it that they've decided to just ignore it instead. Could you give us an outline of what the Trump accounts are, how they function?
Well, it's pretty simple. Governments, they'll deposit seed money of $1,000 into a stock indexed bank account for someone born between 2025 and 2028. And that money will just grow until either the person is 18 or in the 20s and they can withdraw it to use for an education, or they can just let it sit there until they're 60, withdraw it. And then by that time, the hope is that it's ballooned significantly and they can fund your retirement.
Yes, I mean, if you look at I guess any 60-year period along the market, there's a massive increase. It's just the reality. There isn't, there hasn't been a 60-year period where it hasn't gone up significantly. And of course, just to dig a little further into the details here, so that's a standard, I guess, investment, right, of $1,000, the seed money, and that can be capped on top of by the parent or caregiver, and they can make additions to that, which will obviously increase the increasable pie, as it were. Is that right?
Yeah. So you have a cap of $5,000 a year, and you also have a lot of things happening that corporate America is really participating in this program. You had JP Morgan Chase, you have Bank of America, you had the Michael and Susan Dell, you had that woman, that rapper.
You're talking to the wrong guy.
Nicki Minaj. Right. She's contributing to it. So there's a lot of companies who are matching that $1,000 contribution. So, a lot of these people, a lot of these kids who are born, their families working for these companies, they may have $2,000 as soon as they're born deposited into that bank.
No, I mean that's a great thing, right? It's setting people up for the future. That I mean, eventually, that pot might be worth $113,000, and they can pay off their share of the national debt. When
Yeah, that's the point I was making. But there was an interesting analysis from the Treasury Department, and the conclusion was that if you just have $1,000 and you do not touch it, you just put $1,000, you don't do any contributions, you just have compounding growth. They estimated that based on just average stock market returns, that $1,000 would turn into $500,000 by the time you're the age of 60. Which that's an incredible sum. Now, of course, you have to take account to adjust for inflation.
Yeah.
I mean, that thing would probably be cut in half if you do the standard, 2% annual inflation rate. But then instead, of course, if you have a strong stock market that you've had over the last few years, that can be upwards of $1 million.
Yeah, which even with inflation, you can afford a good dinner on that, right?
And some of the interest costs on the national debt.
Well, yeah, a bit. So why is this not just being lauded? I mean, I can't see a downside to this.
I really can't answer that. I mean, there's so much going on in the world of news. Perhaps the mainstream media is just not, focusing on that at all because of, you have Iran, you have the stock market crash, you have Kevin Warsh, you have, so many things ICE. You have so many things going on. But overall, I mean, it's not a. I know some critics will say that, it's a bailout for Wall Street. But if you look at the price tag, I mean, there's not an official cost of it, but you just do an estimate. And most estimates say around $15 billion this program would cost. I mean, that's
over 4 years, right?
Yes. So I mean, that's how much of a bailout for Wall Street. Wall Street, they engage about $500 billion transactions a day. So $15 billion is just a drop in the bucket for the U.S. stock market.
Yeah, it's the kind of idea where I wonder why it hasn't been done before, because you're using the natural upwards trajectory of your stock market, which is, I mean, it's natural, right? It just keeps going up over time, maybe dips and whatnot, but over time it just keeps going up, and you're just using that for a very small investment. You end up with something that can be quite substantially life-changing, whether that's paying for the ever-expanding education bill or even the retirement nest egg, or even, because it's not as though they've only got a choice to take it out when they're 18 or 60, right?
Yeah, they can do that.
They can take it out at any point in between there. That's a decent deposit on a house. That's getting people, into the housing market when maybe they couldn't beforehand.
Yeah, that's one of the criteria is that you can use it for deposit house, or it can use to start a business. Those are some of the criteria you can use to avoid the tax penalty on it.
Well, that's the other thing I wanted to ask about this, Andrew. I wanted to check what the incentives are for parents to invest in this. Now, this is a tax. If a parent decides to match that each year, I put $1,000 and $2,000 into the account. There's a tax advantage there for the parent.
Yeah, so these tax contributions are tax deferred. It operates similar to an individual retirement account or IRA, where you don't pay taxes until you withdraw from it. And in some cases, you may not pay tax at all if you're using it for one of the criteria, like paying for your college education. So that's one of the advantages behind it. I think another advantage too that's not talked about is that if you invest in it into a stock market index that pays a dividend, whether it's a monthly or quarterly dividend, you're getting a nice also income on top of the capital windfall. So you have, you're putting together both the equity build and also the dividend income, which is great. I mean, that's twofold. That's great.
We'll see how it pans out. Andrew Moran, we'll be back after this short break.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Andrew Moran, Liberty Nation's Economics Affairs Editor, and me, your host, Mark Angelides, who remains Mark Angelides, as always. Much to other people's sadness. Now, Andrew, I wanted to shift tones briefly and go away from the economic sphere and discuss a fascinating but deadly, in my opinion, demographic shift that's taking place, and that is loneliness. Give me the details.
I think it ties also to economics too. Being alone is really not good for the broader economy or society in general, based on just welfare, Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare, because you need more people to pay into those programs. Be that as it may, there was a recent analysis by a terrific economist named Torsten Slok, who's a lot of great analysis, and he was combing through Census Bureau data, and he found that 40 million Americans, or nearly about a fifth of households, are just alone. Not just one person. That's it. That's up from 19 million in the 1960s, or 13% around that time. And then you dive deeper into it, and that's what I did. I wanted to, because I've seen so many reports over the years of how, one example, the death of the cousin. Since fewer people are having children, there are fewer cousins, fewer individuals living with cousins. And I see this firsthand too. In my neck of the woods here, you see when our kids take the school bus, about 100 kids take the school bus, and a majority of them are just singletons. You don't see, my kids are twins, and they're one of the few siblings who go to that school. I mean, you just erasing the school bus situation from that. It's having two children or more is a minority in our school, and this is becoming a common factor in the Western world. Or even East. You look at South Korea, has the lowest fertility rate among advanced economies. So being alone is going to be is the human condition. It seems to be
I hear a Schopenhauer coming on. Yes, Andrew and I have, for those of you who are interested in the behind the scenes stuff, Andrew and I have been discussing the human condition from Schopenhauer and Kierkegaard, and he's of the view that life is either what is it, misery or horror, existential.
Horrible and the miserable.
Horrible and the miserable. And I take a different view. My view here is that the purpose of life is not happiness, but rather meaning. And meaning can be found in many places, and not, as Andrew would insist, as a distraction from the mundanity of life, or listening to
Liberty Nation, the Liberty Nation radio show, Mark and Julie. That provides meaning to millions of people who listen.
I'm glad you said that. I was going to say that your disposition is due to you being an economist, but I won't say that now, Andrew. So what we're having here with the, I don't know, is it a loneliness epidemic or is it a household systems epidemic? What is it? And is it using epidemic the right term even? But I think you've got to kind of broaden this as well, right? So people are earning more money than they ever have. Now, that's obviously relative to certain conditions. But there's also this push for individual autonomy by age 18 to 21, right? People want to move out. They want to be by themselves, whereas 50, 60 years ago, you tend not to move out until you're married anyway, right? Because why would you, right? Stay at home. In the words of Rodney Dangerfield at I believe the movie's called Back to School, he says, stay at home, let your parents worry about you. But there's, with people going to the workforce, especially women making up a significant portion of the workforce now as well, they're going out on their own, they're moving cities, work and life has become a more mobile practice. So maybe they're not around families. And so what you end up with are these, it's almost like what would you call it? Like consensus reimagining, I guess. So you have people that are now living alone. And so other people see that and say, oh, living alone, that's the new norm. And the people tend to be of the generation just above theirs or a few years ahead of them. I guess it's portrayed as well in sitcoms for the last, I don't know, I guess 30 years now. Seinfeld. I knew Andrew would go that. They all live alone. That's 4 individuals who all live alone, who don't really seem to have any family connections other than George Costanza and his parents, who he wishes he didn't have any family connection to.
Or George's fiance, and that was portrayed as such a miserable situation.
Yeah. Seinfeld, for those of you who haven't watched it, it's worth a watch. But yeah, so it's become almost something that people look to and they say, well, this is the new normal. And so they move in for that. They go for that. And it's a self-fulfilling situation. But again, more on the emotional side here, there's an element of loneliness that comes with that, isn't there?
I think I don't think you can pin it down to one specific reason of why people are living alone. I think there's a cacophony of reasons why they do that. I mean, one thing, you look at the data for the last, let's say 20, 30 years, fewer people are going out, fewer people are having fewer friends. I mean, I think the number of people who say they have friends is at an all-time low. People are disconnecting with their families. And one thing you see constant in that is the use of smartphones. And people are just at home on their smartphones, connecting to people online, playing their games, just staying at home. And the other issue, I think also it's a reasonable one, is the cost of living. The cost of living is outrageous. It's, one thing I see on X a lot is that people are complaining how individuals or young people are shunning alcohol, and they're not going to pubs, they're not going to the local brewery, they're not doing any of that stuff. And they're saying, "Oh, look at these! They're so worried about becoming alcoholics or damaging their kidneys." I think the reality of that is, one, people are staying home with their phones, and two, is the cost of alcohol is enormous. So I think those are another aspects of it. So people, this new thing too, I love hearing about is social anxiety. People are anxious of just communicating. I saw this one poll, and it said that I think 35% of Generation Zers are scared to go to a barista to order coffee. So I think this ties in all of them too, because if you're a young person on your phone at home, you're not having that daily practice of communicating and verbalizing, getting to know individuals and then you recoil in disgust at the idea of communicating with human being, or Schopenhauer would say a fellow human sufferer.
A fellow human sufferer. So actually, that's actually something, we're both parents, you and I, of young families, and socializing your children, it's a verb, right? It's something that's got to be active, otherwise they don't. Like, you've got to put them in situations where they're used to speaking with people, used to approaching for play, very specifically for play. That's psychologically, that's one of the most, having a child that's geared for play is one of the most, in my opinion, it's one of the best things you can do for them.
I would just make one quick point about socializing, because my kids are very social. They're very extroverted individuals, and the complete opposite to me and their mother. But the problem is that when they go to the playground and they want to communicate, they want to interact with other kids, the other kids don't know how to do that. So when our kids see that, they just back off and try to do whatever else. My son, for example, his new thing is that at recess, he'll just sit on the bench and read a book now. Because it seems like the other kids, they don't know. They never had that practice. Maybe because of the pandemic, they were isolated for so long. But since our kids could talk, they've just been so outgoing and talking to everybody in their path and wanting to play with everybody. It's just the other kids, prevent them from going to that next step even further.
It's an issue that's going to come to a head, unfortunately, sooner rather than later. Andrew Moran, thanks ever so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing our wonderful, fascinating conversations today with Liberty Nation's correspondent and author, Michelle White. Thanks for sticking around, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
So, Michelle, you wrote a fascinating piece on the pages of libertynation.com talking about the Save America Act, which was once, when it was an unmarried piece of legislation, was just the Save Act.
Right.
Now, this has got a new lease of life and a lot of new attention. If you could just give us a brief synopsis of what the legislation is about.
Well, the legislation originally was about making sure that non-citizens don't vote in the election, which the Republicans are trying to push through. But it really didn't have that much traction until the last few weeks. Scott Presler has made it his mission to basically call Senator Thune every day, and he has since January 1st, to tell him to pass it. He's posting profusely on X. He's gathered a following, and it's kind of taken off from there. And then several Republican lawmakers are also putting their names on it. There's 48 co-sponsors. Senator Mike Lee is the sponsor. He's got 48 signatures with him now. My congressman, Chip Roy, is also they released together the new version, which is the Save America Act, which came at President Trump's initiation to change the name from the Save Act to the Save America Act, and then they added the voter ID to it.
Yes. So, just for those who aren't familiar, Scott Presler, he's been around for a good few years now, but he's an independent activist, I guess you'd call it, who works very much on boots on the ground, voter registration, and he gets a lot of credit, I think, for Donald Trump winning Pennsylvania in 2024.
Yes.
Because really the amount of people he and his organization got signed up to support and speaking, I think
Right.
I believe President Trump has acknowledged how invaluable his help was. So when he's pushing for something, he's a very effective person.
He is.
And being so effective, people tend to listen a bit more. And so, yes, I think there will be some movement on the Save America Act. Let's dig into what it actually means. So, the basic premise here is that it would be codified that identification must be shown to vote in, and now we're talking specifically federal elections here, rather than
right.
Others, because obviously in some states and cities, non-citizens can vote in local elections and propositions and things. But here we're talking federal elections, so an ID would be required to vote in those, and assurances to eliminate the odds or chances or risk of non-citizens casting a vote. Now that's obviously a twofold thing. One, it being that nobody wants illegal aliens to vote in an election.
Right.
Because especially, so actually follow me down the bunny trail here, if you will, Michelle.
Happy to.
Let's say that there's a position on the political left that somebody who comes to America, illegally or legally, is just as American. Right? It's, they're just as American as everybody else, whether they've been here a day or they've been here 20 years and set up a life and they've had children who go off to college, maybe have a business, own a home, but they're in essentially the same category as somebody who arrived yesterday and somebody who arrived 20 years ago. They're in
That's
the
what
same
they
category.
say.
Yeah. So that's the position. And then if the person who arrived 20 years ago has the opportunity to vote in an election, what's to stop the person who arrived a day ago? And let's put the cherry on this. What's to stop, I don't know, in a local election, a regional election, what's to stop, I don't know, some foreign government saying, right, we're going to send 50,000 people down there to register this month and then vote in that election to impact the outcome.
How do we know that's not already happening? We don't know that's not already happening.
The fact is, we do not know that this is not already happening. Excuse me for all the negative, double, triple negatives in there. But yes, we don't know that that's not already happening. And of course, history tells us that the movement, the inward movement of people, the migration of people into areas has been used to affect not only demographic change, but political change. And that's happened throughout history and throughout the world. And the idea that, well, we're in 2026 now, and I got it right that time, we're in 2026 now, this kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore. It's almost laughable to think that is not in the back of some bad actor's mind to start doing that. So, yes, so it's to stop illegal migrants impacting a vote for which they have no right to vote in, or to be part of that election, that specific federal election. And the second is essentially it's to cut back on cheating, right?
Right.
Yeah.
There's a third provision. The third provision is that it would clean up the voter rolls so that illegal voters already on the rolls would be purged from those lists. And with the backdrop of what's going on in Georgia right now, it's almost perfect PR for this, the Save America Act to pass. But whether or not it will is the bigger question.
Absolutely, yes. By Georgia, you're referring to the
Fulton County,
Fulton County, getting all the records.
The FBI taking.
And a range of agencies on the scene there, which, without getting too conspiratorial, that would involve foreign engagement for the people who are there to be there. So that's pretty fascinating. So there is going to be, let's be very clear about this, the Save America Act here. It's an uphill battle for the Republicans here, isn't it? Because they don't have a supermajority. It's not
Well,
something that's going to be able to go through on a simple majority with, or even
Right.
just with JD Vance, the tiebreaker.
which is why Scott Pressler is also pushing to nuke the filibuster so that they
Sure.
can pass with a simple majority. But as you know, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna also has some ideas up her sleeve to slow walk any votes or to block any votes on the floor. She said she has the Republicans to support her so that this shutdown would be prolonged.
Right, the shutdown. It's only a partial shutdown, of course.
Partial shutdown. Right.
I'm wondering if that's not tactically, if that's not a poor idea, because as far as I gather here, Democrats don't want DHS to receive the funding that it gets so it can
Right.
continue to pay ICE and operate ICE. They don't want
Right.
that to happen anyway. So if Representative Anna Paulina Luna blocks other stuff on this, well, they can say, well, it's keeping ICE shut down or it's keeping ICE unfunded. And so,
But it's also unfunded. It also affects TSA and FEMA. It's not just ICE.
sure, yeah. Although
They don't have to own that if they shut down the government twice in 4 months, and this is what I wrote in my article. If both times it will be over illegal aliens. First time it was illegal aliens getting health care. This time, indirectly, it will be because of illegal alien enforcement with ICE, but then indirectly with the Save America Act. If that tactic works, that would
it's not a good
gut a whole-
it's not a good long-term legacy look, is it?
No, it's not. It's not a good look, and it makes you wonder, why are you fighting so hard, willing to shut down the government for illegal aliens and benefits they're not entitled to?
Yeah, well, if people want illegal aliens to have benefits, well, then they need to pass laws for that, and they need to get everybody on side for that to vote for it. And of course, that presents it's all well and good for Congress to put laws together and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to provide this much funding to illegal aliens as they come in. We're going to provide these rights to illegal aliens as they come in. And that's what Congress is for. However, there's a cost to that, of course, isn't there? Because despite the tactics of ICE being quite unpopular, I believe it's 61% of Americans are against the tactics that ICE are using at the moment. And of course, that does come heat of the moment after 2 tragic deaths. That is a heat of the moment reaction. But the larger picture, there is a majority, not a small majority, but a majority who support deporting all illegal aliens. So the principle is there, if not the methodology, in terms of support for President Trump on this, which brings us to where the math doesn't quite work. Lawmakers in Congress who want legislation to, for example, allow illegal immigrants healthcare benefits, voting rights, things like this, they have to face the voters at some point. And the voters, 54%, want all illegal aliens removed.
Right.
How do you think they're going to react to? They want them removed, and then you've got the lawmaker that represents your constituency, your district, saying, rather than removing them, how about we let them vote and give them health care that you don't have?
Right.
Yeah, it's not a great. That's
not going to go over well.
No, it's not. Michelle, I recommend everybody goes and reads your excellent piece over at the pages of libertynation.com. I want to thank you for being here. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guests today, Andrew Moran and Michelle White, and of course extend my thanks to you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in each week. You are appreciated. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse campaigns, candidates, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.